Mamta Kafle Bhatt vanished without a trace, leaving behind unanswered questions and a husband, Rudra Bhatt, who seemed more relieved than devastated. The evidence pointed to murder, but without a body, doubts lingered. Had Rudra truly killed his wife, or was there a darker secret waiting to be uncovered? Mamta Kafle Bhatt was a 32-year-old woman known for her intelligence, kindness, and strong work ethic. She had built a successful career in corporate finance, earning respect from colleagues and admiration from friends. Her marriage to Rudra Bhatt seemed ordinary to outsiders, stable, uneventful, and without any major problems. They had been together for 6 years, living in a modest but comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing about her life suggested she would simply vanish into thin air. But one evening, that's exactly what happened. It started with silence. Mamta, who was always responsive to messages and calls, stopped replying. At first, her friends thought she might have been busy with work. She often stayed late at the office, dedicated to her role. But as the hours passed, their concern grew. By the next morning, she had failed to check in with anyone. Not her best friend, not her co-workers, and not even her mother, whom she called every day without fail. It was completely out of character. Her employer was the first to sound the alarm. When she didn't show up for work and failed to notify anyone, her supervisor contacted her emergency contact, Rudra. He casually responded that she had left for an out-of-town work trip, something her boss found strange. Mamta had never mentioned traveling, and there were no official records of any scheduled trips. When her family reached out to Rudra, his response was the same. He claimed she had left on short notice and might not have had time to inform everyone. Yet, her phone remained off. Her suitcase was nowhere to be found, and none of her usual travel essentials, her passport, purse, or even a change of clothes, were missing from the house. Days passed, and worry turned to panic. Her family filed a missing persons report, and police launched an official investigation. Officers arrived at the Bhatt residence searching for any sign of forced entry or a struggle. The house was spotless, almost too clean. Nothing seemed out of place, but something felt off. Investigators noted that Mamta's car was still in the driveway, untouched. If she had left on a trip, how had she traveled? No rideshare or taxi. Records indicated she had left the house that night. When questioned, Rudra remained calm but vague. He repeated his story but failed to provide details about where she had gone or why she hadn't contacted anyone. His behavior raised suspicion. He didn't appear anxious or distressed over his wife's sudden disappearance. He hadn't reported her missing himself, despite the growing concern from others. Police found this unusual for a husband whose wife had vanished without a trace. The investigation intensified as officers expanded their search. They checked surveillance footage from their neighborhood, hoping to spot Mamta leaving the house. Strangely, there was no sign of her on any cameras. No footage showed her walking out the front door, getting into a car, or leaving the area. The last known sighting of her was inside the home she shared with Rudra. After that, she was gone. Friends and co-workers came forward with new information. Mamta had confided in a close friend weeks before her disappearance, expressing concerns about her marriage. She had hinted at problems but never elaborated. There were no official reports of domestic violence, but something had clearly been troubling her. Authorities dug deeper into Rudra's background, uncovering financial struggles he had kept hidden. He had accumulated debt, taken out loans, and recently withdrawn a large sum of money from their shared account without informing Mamta. The turning point in the case came when investigators used forensic tools to examine the house more closely. Under UV light, they detected small traces of blood in the bathroom, barely visible to the naked eye. It appeared as though someone had attempted to clean it, but not thoroughly enough to erase all evidence. The discovery changed the course of the investigation entirely. Rudra, once just a concerned husband, was now the prime suspect in what was starting to look like something far more sinister than a simple disappearance. As the investigation deepened, the focus shifted almost entirely to Rudra Bhatt. The inconsistencies in his statements, the missing travel records, and the forensic evidence in their home made him the primary suspect in Mamta's disappearance. Law enforcement began piecing together a timeline, and with every new piece of information, the case against him grew stronger. Detectives re-examined his claims about Mamta's supposed work trip. A thorough check with her employer confirmed that no such trip had been scheduled. There were no plane tickets booked in her name, no hotel reservations, and no colleagues who expected her arrival. She had left behind her identification, her credit cards, and all of her personal belongings, everything that a person planning a trip would have taken. If she had left voluntarily, she had done so without a trace, which made no sense. Attention turned to Rudra's financial activity in the days leading up to Mamta's disappearance. Bank records showed multiple large cash withdrawals, totaling an amount unusual for his spending habits. Even stranger, he had purchased several cleaning supplies including industrial-strength bleach, garbage bags, and gloves, just 2 days before Mamta was last seen. When asked about these transactions, his answers were vague and contradictory. He claimed the withdrawals were for home repairs, yet there was no evidence of any work being done. The cleaning supplies, he insisted, were for routine household chores, but the sheer quantity raised suspicions. Forensic experts continued analyzing the Bhatt residence. The traces of blood found in the bathroom were tested, and the results confirmed they belonged to Mamta. Investigators believed the scene had been cleaned thoroughly, but not well enough to erase all signs of what had happened. The discovery painted a dark picture. If Mamta had been injured or worse, it had likely happened inside her own home. The question remained, where was her body? With mounting pressure, police secured a search warrant for Rudra's car. Inside the trunk, they found more evidence that suggested foul play. A roll of plastic sheeting, the same brand as the one he had purchased days earlier, was neatly folded. A closer examination of the interior revealed faint traces of blood, though it had been wiped down. Cadaver dogs alerted officers to the presence of human decomposition, though no body was found. Investigators were convinced that Mamta's body had been transported in the vehicle before being disposed of elsewhere. Detectives started to unravel Rudra's possible motive. Witnesses from Mamta's workplace revealed that she had been considering leaving him. She had confided in a colleague about feeling trapped in her marriage and was exploring the idea of separation. This revelation was significant. If Mamta had planned to leave, Rudra may have seen it as a betrayal, a threat to his stability, or a humiliation he could not accept. The financial records showed that their bank accounts had been jointly managed, and a divorce could have left him in serious financial distress. Authorities believed that whatever had happened to Mamta was not an accident. The blood in the bathroom, the cleaning supplies, the withdrawals, and the evidence in the car all suggested a planned act rather than a spontaneous event. Even without a body, the prosecution believed they had enough to move forward. The case gained media attention, and public outrage grew. The idea that a woman could disappear so completely with only circumstantial evidence pointing to a crime unsettled the community. Some believed that Rudra was guilty beyond any doubt, while others questioned whether it was possible for a conviction to happen without a body. The legal team debated whether they had enough to prosecute, but in the end, they decided the evidence was overwhelming. Rudra Bhatt was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife. His demeanor remained unchanged as he was taken into custody, showing no signs of remorse or emotion. Despite the arrest, one mystery remained unsolved. Where was Mamta's body? As the trial of Rudra Bhatt approached, prosecutors faced a difficult challenge. The evidence against him was compelling, but without a body, there was still room for doubt. His defense team wasted no time in exploiting this weakness. They argued that there was no definitive proof that Mamta was dead, only missing. Without physical remains, they claimed the case was built on speculation rather than certainty. The prosecution, however, was determined to prove that Rudra had murdered his wife and disposed of her body. They meticulously presented the evidence collected from the Bhatt residence. The traces of Mamta's blood in the bathroom, the heavy-duty cleaning supplies purchased just before her disappearance, and the cash withdrawals painted a chilling picture. They argued that Rudra had planned the crime, methodically covering his tracks. The cadaver dogs alerting to the scent of decomposition in his trunk was another damning piece of evidence. But the defense countered that the dogs were not infallible, and that no human remains had been found. As the case unfolded in court, a new revelation came to light, one that further damaged Rudra's credibility. A woman named Sanya Patel, who had briefly dated Rudra before he married Mamta, came forward with disturbing claims. She testified that he had a history of controlling behavior and violent tendencies. While she had never gone to the police, she recounted incidents of emotional and physical abuse, warning that Mamta might have suffered the same fate. Though the defense dismissed her testimony as irrelevant, the jury listened closely. Investigators continued searching for Mamta's body, expanding their efforts to remote locations outside the city. They scoured wooded areas, abandoned construction sites, and lakes where Rudra's phone had pinged in the days after Mamta's disappearance. Nothing turned up. It was as if Mamta had vanished into thin air. Then, a critical breakthrough occurred. A forensic analysis of Rudra's internet history revealed searches that were deeply incriminating. In the weeks leading up to Mamta's disappearance, he had looked up methods for disposing of a body, how long it took for a body to decompose, in different environments, and the effectiveness of various cleaning agents in removing DNA traces. He had also searched for locations with deep water reservoirs and abandoned wells. These searches shattered any remaining doubt that he was involved in her disappearance. Despite this evidence, Rudra maintained his innocence. He showed no emotion in court, refusing to acknowledge the mounting evidence against him. His defense team insisted that the searches were unrelated, that the blood evidence was circumstantial, and that no one could prove Mamta had not left voluntarily. The prosecution, however, had one final piece of evidence: an insurance policy. Just months before Mamta disappeared, Rudra had taken out a large life insurance policy on her, listing himself as the sole beneficiary. He had not informed her family about it, and she had never mentioned it to her friends. Investigators believed this was his ultimate motive. With his financial troubles mounting and his marriage crumbling, Rudra had found a way to eliminate his wife and profit from her death. As the trial reached its final days, the weight of the evidence became undeniable. The jury listened to the closing arguments, knowing they had to make a decision that would define the case. Without a body, could they convict a man of murder? Could they trust the forensic findings, the digital evidence, and the circumstantial details to reach a guilty verdict? The courtroom was tense as the jury deliberated. The world watched, waiting to see if justice for Mamta Kafle Bhatt would be served, or if her husband would walk free, leaving the question of her fate forever unanswered. As the jury deliberated, the weight of the case settled over the courtroom like a suffocating fog. The evidence against Rudra Bhatt was overwhelming, yet the absence of Mamta's body left an unsettling gap in the prosecution's case. Legal. Analysts debated whether the jury would be willing to convict without physical proof of death. The defense had expertly exploited this doubt, arguing that no one could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mamta had been murdered. After all, people disappeared voluntarily every day. What if she had simply chosen to leave? Outside the courthouse, the public was divided. Some were convinced of Rudra's guilt, pointing to the blood in the bathroom, the cleaning supplies, the life insurance policy, and the internet searches as undeniable proof that he had murdered his wife. Others questioned whether the case was built on assumptions. Without a body, could the court truly prove a crime had occurred? Days passed as the jury weighed the evidence. The tension in the courtroom was palpable when they finally returned with a verdict. The judge asked for the decision to be read aloud, and all eyes turned to the jury foreman. Guilty. A wave of emotion rippled through the room. Some sighed in relief, others wept. Rudra remained stoic, his expression unchanging as the sentence was announced. He was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The prosecution had successfully argued that while there was no body, the sheer weight of the evidence proved he had killed Mamta and disposed of her remains. But the verdict did not bring closure. Mamta's family had justice, but they did not have answers. They still did not know where she was. They still did not have a body to bury. Their daughter, sister, and friend remained missing, lost to an unknown fate. Even in prison, Rudra refused to speak about what had happened. He did not confess, did not offer explanations, and showed no signs of remorse. Every attempt to extract information from him was met with silence. It was as if he had made peace with the idea that Mamta's fate would remain a mystery. In the months that followed, new efforts were made to locate Mamta's remains. Investigators re-examined Rudra's movements in the days following her disappearance. They followed the locations he had searched online, dug into areas near lakes, and drained reservoirs in hopes of finding her body. But no matter how hard they searched, nothing was found. Then, a new development shook the case. An anonymous letter arrived at the police department, claiming to know the location of Mamta's remains. The letter was carefully written, containing details that had never been released to the public. It suggested that Mamta's body had been buried in a remote area outside the city, a place Rudra had visited multiple times before her disappearance. Police rushed to the location described in the letter, hoping for a breakthrough. They brought cadaver dogs, forensic experts, and excavation equipment, determined to find the truth. Hours passed as they dug through the dense soil, searching for any sign of Mamta. Then, they found something. A piece of fabric, partially decomposed but still recognizable as the same material Mamta had been wearing the day she disappeared. Nearby, they uncovered fragments of bone. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. After all this time, they had finally found what they had been searching for. Forensic testing would be needed to confirm the remains belonged to Mamta, but authorities were confident they had finally solved the last piece of the puzzle. But one question remained unanswered. Who had sent the letter? And how did they know the truth? The discovery of the remains sent a shockwave through the case. Forensic experts moved quickly to examine the fragments, running DNA tests to confirm whether they belonged to Mamta Kafle Bhatt. The results would take weeks, but investigators were already convinced. The location, the fabric, and the condition of the bones all pointed to the tragic reality. The missing woman had finally been found. The focus now shifted to the mysterious letter. Someone had known where Mamta's body was all along. The letter was analyzed for fingerprints and handwriting comparisons, but there were no immediate matches. It had been mailed from a post office in a neighboring city, meaning the sender had gone out of their way to remain anonymous. Despite the secrecy, investigators had a theory. They believed Rudra had confided in someone, perhaps a fellow inmate or a close friend before his arrest. Maybe that person had struggled with guilt, finally deciding to reveal the truth. But without knowing the sender's identity, they could only speculate. The forensic results confirmed what Mamta's family had feared. The remains belonged to her. Her body had been buried in a shallow grave, showing clear signs of an attempt to hastily conceal a crime. The condition of her bones suggested she had suffered severe trauma before death, likely at the hands of her husband. Mamta's family held a funeral, giving them the closure they had desperately sought for so long. But even as they mourned, one question still haunted them. Who had sent that letter? Authorities continued their investigation, determined to uncover the sender's identity. Then an unexpected clue emerged. Surveillance footage from the post office showed a hooded figure dropping off the letter. Though their face was obscured, their movement seemed oddly familiar to detectives. They had seen this person before. After carefully reviewing the footage, investigators began to suspect the impossible. The mannerisms, the posture, the slight limp. It all pointed to someone who should not have been able to send the letter. Someone who was supposed to be behind bars, Rudra Bhatt. But how? He was locked up, serving a life sentence. There was no record of him being allowed outside the prison walls. The idea seemed absurd, until investigators dug deeper. They reviewed phone calls, visitor logs, and monitored his known associates. Eventually, they discovered that Rudra had been using a fellow inmate to communicate with someone on the outside. He had managed to smuggle out information about Mamta's burial site, orchestrating the letter's delivery in a twisted game of control. When confronted, Rudra finally broke his silence. He admitted to killing Mamta in a fit of rage and disposing of her body, but he never showed remorse. Instead, he smirked as he spoke, as if reliving the crime gave him satisfaction. He had sent the letter as a final act of dominance, controlling when and how his wife's body was found. For Mamta's family, the truth was both a relief and a cruel reminder of the man they had once trusted. Though Rudra would never walk free, again his actions had inflicted wounds that could never fully heal. The case became infamous, a chilling reminder that justice doesn't always come swiftly or cleanly. It took years to find Mamta, and even when her body was recovered, the scars of her disappearance remained. But in the end, she was no longer just missing. She was found, and the man who took her life could no longer hide behind his lies.